May the words of my mouth and the inspiration of my heart be to your service, O God. Amen. So after a gospel like that, you probably expect, especially in stewardship season, a stewardship sermon. Not going to happen. In fact, once we know this gospel, we know there's no stewardship sermon here. And in a week like this, you might expect words to meet the moment. Might happen. And oddly enough, this text, for all of its strangeness, has a way of meeting the moment. It's a strange, strange story we get when you listen to it well. Let me give you some background first. So Jesus is in the temple. At this point in Mark's gospel, Jesus has come to Jerusalem, and we're now embarking on that long process of coming to his persecution, his death, and his resurrection. And in the stories just before this, he's been engaging with the scribes of the temple, the people overseeing this place. Now, what is this place at this moment? Well, it was given by God as the place and the means by which God would make God's self known to God's people. Just like I said to the kids a few moments ago, we channel, we embody for them through our baptism God's grace and mercy. The temple and its leaders was meant to channel, to embody for the people God's grace. But something had happened. As is true of human beings, the folks in charge, with a little bit of power, decided to draw a little more power to themselves time and time again. And by the time of Jesus' day, this place that was a mediator between God and the people and a way for God to reach out to God's people and to extend God's mercy had become a human institution. A place where people were changing money, selling their goods, and depositing their savings. And they had come to believe that this human institution, it was going to do it for them. That they really didn't have to worry anymore about what God said. It was enough to be a part of this human institution. It was going to be their deliverance. And so we come to today's text. After a series of episodes, as I say, in which Jesus essentially says about the temple and to the temple's leaders, you are corrupt beyond repair. You know that parable he tells back in chapter 11 of the vineyard owner, God, who hires laborers to work the vineyard, the scribes, and who, when the vineyard owner comes to collect the wealth in the person of his servants and eventually his son, the laborers send them away empty, beaten, and finally killed. It couldn't have been more obvious to the scribes who Jesus was talking about and what he was saying. It was a frontal attack on the temple. Because this thing that had served as a means for God to speak and care for God's people had become a corrupt human institution. Something that humans used simply to control each other, to gather wealth, to determine what was true and what was not true, to say that they had the corner on all of it. And so we come to today's text, and Jesus says in his teaching, watch out for the scribes, the ones who want to walk around in finery and accept the greetings of all in the marketplace. The ones who take the highest seat in the synagogue, the ones who take the top row at the banquet, these are the ones who are literally consuming the house that is the well-being of the widows. They, says Jesus, will receive the greater condemnation. So think about that. That's a comparative. When you throw out a comparative, there's something you're comparing it to. And so Jesus goes on. And then sitting before and it's this great word, gazophylakion. It's the bank deposit box. It's like the ATM where you go and, you got your paycheck back in the day when you'd actually deposit a paycheck. You'd stick it in the ATM for safekeeping. He sits in front of it and he watches how people come in bale kalkon. They make deposits into the temple treasury. Because they've been told that not only if you patronize the merchants in the temple, but if you deposit your wealth here, it's all going to be okay. Because here's where truth is. Here are the ones who manage your relationship to each other and to God. We'll take care of it. He sits there and he watches and he sees that people are coming to do this, and he sees how the scribes the wealthy come and deposit large amounts. But then he says, look, there's this poor widow. She's already poor as a widow, but she's qualified here as really poor, meaning she's living in a world where, and if you know the law, the Jewish law, you care for the widow, the orphan, and the sojourner. She's living in a world where people apparently have forgotten that. And she comes and she deposits her wealth as well. 2 coins at the smallest denomination. And Jesus says, wow, that's all she has. That's all she has to live on. And she just put it in there. What do you think? What's the comparison? Because remember, Jesus said, they will receive the greater condemnation. Well, I got news for you. The reason this can't be a stewardship sermon is because she receives the lesser. She's a victim of them, but she takes part in the same broken system. She comes, having been told by the scribes, by the leaders of the temple, that if you just do these things, we got it. We'll take care of it for you. Yes, they deserve the greater condemnation. But she, like all those others who came and deposited their wealth, some great and some large, and she, her entire living, she deserves condemnation, just lesser than they. That's a hard word. That's a tough word to hear. And then you know how true this word is from Mark, or at least how much Mark meant it. Because what we should do on this day is hear the next 2 verses. And then, Jesus coming out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, see these great stones and these great buildings." In awe, he says. And Jesus said to him, "Yeah, see these great buildings. Not one stone sitting upon another will be left. It will be thrown down." Makes it pretty clear, doesn't it? That human institution, says Jesus, that thing that you thought could replace God's direct mediation to you, that thing you put your trust in, it's going to be thrown down completely. And by the time Mark's audience hears this gospel, they know it's true. The temple is being destroyed at that very moment. So how in heaven's name does that meet our moment? Well, we have just finished an extraordinarily exhausting election season, haven't we? Exhausting. And leading up to this election, no matter which side you were on, you knew how it was posed, right? It's like the scribes in the temple. We got the truth. Both sides. We've got the truth. And if you don't go with us, your existence, your very existence, is at risk. You heard it. You heard the term over and over again. This is existential for democracy. This is existential for, and so on down the line. Man, those scribes, the pundits, the politicians. It's what got me most angry this week. To think how far down that road we went, that I went. And guess what? It's happened before, hasn't it? If you're a bit of a history buff like I am, you know that, for instance, Marxism, it said, we're going to reach the end of history. We're going to show you it's the way it is. It's human institutions, that's the way it is, and we're going to come to the end of history, and it's all going to be fine. Didn't work, did it? Well, we often forget here that neoliberalism, ask me about it someday, but suffice it to say it's a kind of capitalist dream and democracy dream. When the Berlin Wall fell, somebody called Francis Fukuyama, somebody know this name, wrote a famous essay, turned it into a book, The End of History. We've reached the end of history because the political and economic ideology that is true to the human nature that is all of ours has now won. And there will be burps and hiccups along the way, but we're done, we're finished. Francis Fukuyama is still trying to live down that book, that essay, still trying to convince us that he's one of the scribes worth listening to. So today, this weird text meets the moment. It catches us for who we are. It reminds us that human institutions, we need them. They needed the temple way back when. We need the law. It still has a place for us. But we should never forget, though we will, I assure you, that at the end of the day, our existence, our identity, our fate is determined not by the scribes and the corrupted temple, not by the politicians and the pundits, not by the Democrats, not by the Republicans, not by Kamala Harris, not by Donald Trump, but by God through his Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross and was raised from the grave to say to us, this is how God comes to you. Luther has a famous treatise on the freedom of a Christian. It has a simple phrase: we are free and subject to none. We are bound and subject to all. We are free and subject to none because God comes to us unmediated in the water of baptism, in the word preached, in the bread and wine of Eucharist, in the presence of each other, bearing that to each other. We do not have to be enslaved. And when we know that, we are freed into the world to be bound to all. To return to that ugly, difficult arena of politics and look for ways to live out the mercy that has been shown to us. And don't ask me today what that looks like or what that means. I still haven't gotten my head around it. I'm still struggling. But I know that that's where I must be. That's where you must be. Having received the water of baptism, having heard the word, receiving time and again the body and blood. That's who we are. God's people released into the world free. Free to not be enslaved to the scribes and the temple, the pundits, the politicians. Free to live for the world that needs so badly to know this Jesus in whose name we live. Amen.